Hello, and welcome tonight. We invite you to settle in, to let the weight of the day gently release its hold, and to allow your mind to drift back in time. There is no need to concentrate, no need to follow every twist and turn, but to a place far more familiar, and perhaps for that reason, far more unsettling. We are going to a small town in the American Midwest, a place of quiet streets, predictable seasons, and deep-rooted community, a place called Circleville, Ohio. Simply allow the story to wash over you, a gentle current carrying you towards rest. In our modern world of instant communication, the physical letter has a certain nostalgia to it. But in Circleville, in the late 1970s, letters began to appear that were anything but nostalgic. You might not have known their deepest secrets, but you knew their comings and goings. You knew which car belonged to which family, who attended which church, whose children played on which sports team. There was a comfort in this predictability, a sense of safety and a shared, unspoken understanding of how life was lived. A letter arrived in the Gillespie's mailbox. It wasn't a bill or a postcard from a relative. It was addressed to Mary, and it accused her of having an affair with the school superintendent, a man named Good Massey. An accusation like this, true or not, was a stain, or to acknowledge the poison that had just been slipped under their door. They chose, at first, to keep it quiet, perhaps believing it was a twisted, one-time prank. The writer claimed to be watching. "I know what you are doing," the letter seemed to scream in its silent, blocky print. Every ring of the telephone, every car that slowed down on their street, could be the writer. The letters were postmarked from Columbus, a nearby city, making them impossible to trace to a specific person in their small town. The writer was a ghost, a phantom who seemingly knew their secrets and held the power to shatter their world with nothing more than paper and ink. Suddenly, the familiar streets, the passing cars, the faces of neighbors, all seemed to hold a new, menacing potential. Who had sent this? Who was watching? The letter was not just an accusation. It was a threat. It warned her to end the alleged affair, or her life would be exposed to the entire town. The envelope was plain, the address written in a distinctive, almost crude block lettering. Most disturbingly, a letter was sent directly to Mary's husband, Ron. It was written in the same unsettling block script. It repeated the accusation against his wife and the superintendent, and it issued a direct threat to him. It told him that if he did not put a stop to the affair, his life could be in danger. The letters of each word were uneven, as if drawn with great, deliberate pressure by someone unaccustomed to writing, or perhaps someone trying to disguise their natural hand. They were instruments of fear, penned by an unseen hand, carrying secrets and threats that would poison the town's quiet atmosphere. The stage was set, the characters were in place, and the anonymous author of this drama was just beginning their campaign of terror. Mary was a part of this town's daily rhythm. She saw them grow up, year by year, through the large rearview mirror above her head. She was a familiar, dependable face. She was married to a man named Ron Gillespie, and together they were raising a family, living a life that, from the outside, looked just as ordinary and stable as any other in Circleville. She was a school bus driver for the Westfall School District. Picture her in the driver's seat of that long, yellow bus, the vinyl of the seat, cracked from years of use, the heavy, mechanical groan of the door opening and closing at each stop, the chorus of young voices filling the space behind her. Our journey tonight takes us not to a battlefield of old, nor the court of a king. These letters would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to suspicion, tragedy, and a mystery that, to this day, has never truly been solved. We are going to explore the story of the Circleville letter writer, a story of how anonymous words can unravel a life and a community, one terrifying letter at a time. Let us begin. Autumn brings a crisp chill and the town's most famous event, the Circleville Pumpkin Show, a spectacle of enormous goods, parades, and pumpkin-flavored everything that draws crowds from all over the state. Winters are quiet and cold, the bare branches of the trees stark against a grey sky. And spring brings a sense of renewal, of the earth awakening. A piece of paper, folded and sealed, containing nothing more than ink and words. Imagine, if you will, the power of a simple, handwritten letter. They were written in a strange, blocky script, and they spoke of things that were meant to remain hidden. To understand the story, you must first understand the place. Circleville was, and in many ways still is, the quintessential American small town. It's a place where the rhythm of life is dictated by the changing of the seasons, the school calendar, and the harvest. Adjust your pillow, let your breathing slow,
and your muscles soften. So find a comfortable position.
Our story begins in the year 1976 in Circleville, Ohio.
You worked your job. You raised your family. You knew your neighbors.
Imagine yourself there in the mid-1970s.
The summers are thick with humidity, the air filled with the scent of cut grass and the distant drone of a lawnmower. Life for most people in Circleville was built on routine. Into this predictable world, let us introduce Mary Gillespie. Every school day, she navigated the same country roads, picking up and dropping of the community's children.
Her job was one of immense trust and routine.
The violation, the cold dread that spreads through your chest.
In a town like Circleville, reputation was currency. Then, one day in late 1976, the ordinary was broken. It began, as so many troubles do, quietly. Inside, the message was short, and it was brutal. Imagine the feeling of holding that piece of paper. Mary and Ron were faced with a terrible choice: to ignore it and hope it went away.
But it was not just to the Gillespies, but to others in Circleville.
Soon, more letters began to arrive. The routine of their lives was shattered.
The quiet comfort of their home was replaced by a simmering anxiety.
For Mary and Ron Gillespie, the quiet, predictable rhythm of Circleville had been replaced by a new, terrifying cadence. The constant, gnawing fear of the next letter.
For weeks, the letters had been a private torment for the Gillespie family, a secret source of dread confined within the walls of their home.
But as the threats escalated, becoming more specific and more menacing, the weight of that secret became too much to bear alone. The fear, once a quiet unease, had grown into a constant, heavy presence.
Mary and Ron decided they could no longer handle this themselves.
They had to involve the authorities.
They turned to the Pickaway County Sheriff's Department and to the sheriff himself, Dwight Ratcliffe. The superintendent, Gordon Massey, was questioned.
He adamantly denied any affair with Mary Gillespie. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues were spoken to. Whispers and small-town gossip were sifted for any grain of truth or any hint of a motive.
But no one could or would point to a likely suspect. The letter writer remained a ghost, their identity hidden within the very community they were terrorizing. Imagine Sheriff Ratcliffe's office.
A place of function over form.
A large wooden desk, perhaps,
covered in neat stacks of paperwork. The anonymous threats from the letter writer were no longer just words on a page.
They had been followed by a real death.
To many, the connection was undeniable.
It felt as though the writer had, in some way, forced his death, goading him into that final, fatal drive. The question lingered in a heavy air. Was it a tragic accident, fueled by a moment of rage? Or was it something else? Had Ron been run off the road? Was it possible that the letter writer, this phantom who had haunted his family for months, had finally made good on their threat? And then, on the evening of August 19th, 1977, the situation took a dark and tragic turn.
The game had become deadly.
But they offered few clues. The blocky, unnatural handwriting was a dead end. It was on one of these roads, Route 22, that Ron Gillespie's life ended.
His pickup truck veered off the road and crashed into a large tree.
First responders arrived at the scene to find a single, fatal crash.
The impact had been severe. Grabbing his pistol, a .22 caliber handgun, he told Mary he was going to confront the person responsible.
According to what he told Mary, the call was from the letter writer.
His demeanor shifted instantly. He was angry, agitated. The theory was that, in his enraged and distracted state, Ron had simply lost control of his vehicle.
But the circumstances were deeply unsettling to Sheriff Ratcliffe and his deputies. When they examined the vehicle, they found Ron's pistol on the floor of the truck.
They made a strange and crucial discovery. The gun had been fired once.
There were no other bullet holes in the truck, and no sign of another vehicle being involved.
Had he fired it out the window in frustration? Had he been trying to shoot at something or someone?
The single spent casing added another layer of ambiguity to an already murky situation.
He then stormed out of the house and drove off into the night.
And a thorough forensic analysis revealed no fingerprints, no stray hairs, no DNA.
Experts believed it was intentionally disguised, making any comparative analysis almost impossible.
Sheriff Ratcliffe was a man accustomed to the usual troubles of a rural county property disputes, the occasional burglary, traffic accidents.
The paper and envelopes were common, store-bought varieties impossible to trace.
The letters themselves were the primary evidence.
They were carefully collected and examined.
The writer was careful, disciplined, and seemingly invisible.
A map of the county on the wall, dotted with pins.
The air smelling faintly of coffee and old paper.
A campaign of psychological terror carried out through anonymous letters was something different.
something more insidious. He and his deputies began their investigation with the methodical process of police work. The postmarks provided the only real clue, and it was a frustrating one. Each letter was postmarked in Columbus, a city nearly 30 miles to the north. This significantly widened the pool of potential suspects. The writer wasn't necessarily a neighbor, watching from across the street.
It could be anyone with a reason to travel to the state capital, a commuter, a shopper, someone visiting family, or perhaps it was a resident of Circleville deliberately mailing the letters from another city to throw investigators off the scent. The clue, instead of narrowing the search, made it feel boundless and impossible. The investigation was a slow, grinding process of interviews and dead ends. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled, and the letters continued to arrive.
The strain on the Gillespie family was immense.
The phone rang in the Gillespie home.
Ron answered it. The conversation was brief. Imagine the quiet country roads outside of Circleville.
And lit stretches of asphalt cutting through fields of corn and soybeans.
Officially, the cause of death was ruled an accident. The community was stunned. Ron Gillespie was dead. The death of Ron Gillespie changed everything. A dark cloud of suspicion now settled over Circleville, and the search for the writer took on a desperate new urgency.
In the years following Ron Gillespie's death, a heavy quiet fell over the case.
The letters slowed, though they never stopped entirely, appearing sporadically like faint but painful echoes of the initial terror.
The investigation, for all its effort, remained cold. Mary was driving her usual bus route along the familiar country roads.
Filled with a protective anger, Mary stopped the bus, secured it, and walked over to the fence, intending to tear the hateful sign down.
It was a simple, reactive motion.
She reached out, grabbed the wooden sign, and pulled.
As she rounded a bend, she saw something that made her slow the heavy vehicle to a stop. They ran a trace on the weapon, and this time, they got a hit.
Paul Fresher was Ron Gillespie's brother-in-law, married to Ron's sister, Karen.
He and Mary had known each other for years, though their relationship had reportedly soured after Ron's death.
Mary herself had even voiced her suspicions about him to the sheriff in the past, but there had never been any concrete evidence to link him to the letters. In October of 1983, Paul Fresher was found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to serve 7 to 25 years in the Lima Correctional Institution. Until now, the gun was registered to a man named Paul Fresher, and yet, letters bearing the same blocky handwriting, the same menacing tone, and the same Columbus postmark began to appear once more. They were sent to local residents, to newspapers, to television stations, and even, bizarrely, to Paul Fresher himself, delivered to his prison cell. In a twist that defies simple explanation, and one that ensures this case remains a profound mystery, the letter started again.
As for Fresher, he's a hog and deserves to be in a pen.
How could a man in a high-security prison continue this elaborate campaign? Was he somehow smuggling the letters out with the help of an accomplice on the outside? The identity of the Circleville letter writer was once again a complete mystery, and the only man ever held responsible was sitting in a prison cell, receiving threats from the very person he was supposed to be.
Was this part of an elaborate frame-up, designed by the real writer to sow confusion? Or the most troubling question of all, had the justice system, in its eagerness to close the case, sent an innocent man to prison?
It was a sign crudely made, tied to a fence by the side of the road.
They presented the booby-trapped gun, registered in Fresher's name, as their star exhibit.
They argued that this was the culmination of a years-long campaign of harassment against Mary Gillespie. The letter writer, the town's phantom tormentor, had a face and a name.
He was behind bars. The case, it appeared, was closed.
Fresher, for his part, vehemently maintained his innocence.
He claimed he had sold the gun years ago, or that it had been lost or stolen.
He had no explanation for how it ended up in a trap by the side of the road. He submitted to a handwriting analysis, but the results, like all previous attempts, were inconclusive, given the deliberately disguised nature of the letter's script. This was the break in the case they had been waiting for nearly 7 years. This time, the writer had made a mistake. They had left behind something physical, something traceable, a weapon, and on it, in the now infamous block lettering, was a vulgar and threatening message directed at her teenage daughter. Sheriff Ratcliffe and his team had no new leads, and Ron's death remained officially, if unsatisfactorily, an accident.
For Mary Gillespie, life moved forward, but under the shadow of a constant, unresolved threat.
What she saw sent a chill through her far colder than the February air. The sign was attached to a string, and the string was connected to a box on the ground. Inside the box, aimed directly at the road where she stood, was a pistol. She had just stumbled upon a crudely constructed but potentially lethal booby trap. Had she pulled the sign with just a bit more force, the string would have triggered the gun.
The string was a tripwire.
The rhythm of her life returned, but it was a fragile one.
Then, 6 years later, in February of 1983, that fragile piece was violently broken.
The letter writer, dormant for a time, escalated their campaign from psychological torment to a direct and tangible threat of violence. It happened on a day that began like any other. This was a new violation, an escalation that crossed a sacred line. As she did, she felt a strange resistance, and she glanced down. Shaken, Mary backed away carefully and immediately contacted the sheriff's department. Investigators quickly secured the device. The
.22 caliber pistol was carefully examined, and its serial number was recorded.
The name was a familiar one. Armed with this undeniable link, the investigation moved swiftly. Paul Fresher was arrested and charged with attempted murder.
During the trial, the prosecution laid out its case. The jury was faced with a difficult decision.
In the end, the physical evidence of the gun was too compelling to ignore.
A wave of relief washed over Circleville.
It seemed the long nightmare was finally over, but the story does not end there. Paul Fresher was a ward of the state, held in a maximum security prison. His mail monitored, his communications restricted.
One letter, sent to the Circleville Herald, read, "Now when are you going to believe you aren't getting the truth?"
This threw the entire case into a state of chaos and doubt.
The conviction, which had promised a final clear answer, had instead opened a chasm of new, unanswerable questions.